boy is back, 'cause you know he's the white boy.
Some while ago now, Lionel Shriver made a speech at the Brisbane Writers' Festival complaining about the whole cultural appropriation thing. She made the speech wearing a sombrero and said that this is a problem, it's censoring writers, it's causing an issue, it's telling people what they can and cannot write. And it was a pretty good point, pretty well made. There's been a lot of responses in various blogs, media of various kinds to this, almost universally condemning this speech. And the New York Times is no different. There's an article in there saying who gets to write what. Now the obvious answer here is fuck you, I'll write what I like. And that's what people should be saying. I don't think you need to have direct experience of anything that you're writing about in order to write about it. If you did, there would be no fantasy or science fiction at all. You know, everyone has human empathy. Everyone can understand the other point of view. Everyone is exposed to other points of view and other perspectives. So to ban people from presenting those other perspectives in their work is, yes, censorship and anti-creative. So why would anyone do it? It's especially confusing when you consider that people are crying out for representation in various forms of media, but they don't want people outside their identity group to create that work now, apparently. Do you want more work or don't you? If you're a minority in a population, then obviously the majority is different to you. So if you want to see more representation in media, in that society where you're the minority, you're going to have to persuade the majority and enable and allow the majority to create media that incorporates your minority. It's a catch-22. You want people to create media that involves you, but you don't want them to be people outside your identity group, which is just counterproductive. So the author of this article gets onto one of her friends, the author's Caitlin Greenidge, I think that's how you pronounce her name, gets onto one of her friends on an instant messenger client and asks, why do they want our approval so badly? People don't want your approval, they want your permission. That's one big mistake in this article, assuming that people want approval. They don't want approval, they want permission to be free and creative, and you're in a position of power to grant that permission or to deny that permission. And that goes straight through to the next misconception in the article, in saying that going up against people like Shriver who talk about this is criticism and not censorship. Censorship is a much broader term than these people seem willing to admit. It's anything that constricts or controls someone's expressions. The argument is really over whether this kind of censorship is justified. So, is it justified? In order for censorship to be justified, in order for anything to constrict people to be justified, you have to demonstrate harm, the harm principle. What is the real harm of someone clumsily getting some fine detail of some minority wrong? Really? You're just going to roll your eyes and carry on. I mean, if they're directly calling in a non-fictional sense for the death and destruction of a minority, then perhaps we can see the issue. If they're not, then where is the actual harm? It's just an eye roll and move on, surely. Who knows? Show me the harm. Just justify the censorship. And it is censorship. It may not necessarily be executed by the jackboot of a government, but social pressure can be censorship, boycotts can be censorship, blacklists can be censorship. If you've put pressure onto a publishing company to stop using a particular author, or for them to have particularly strict submission guidelines when it involves minorities, these are all forms of censorship. Censorship is way beyond governance. It can be just, like I said, anything that constricts or controls someone's speech, someone's expression. That bullshit about not punching down comes through as well in this. Everything is ripe for satire. Everything is ripe for humour. Nothing should be exempted from that. People below you on the power scale can be just as hypocritical, just as overblown, just as stupid as anybody else. And that's still ripe for criticism, ripe for humor, ripe for mockery. Why not? You know? What's your justification there? Where's the harm again? Really, what do you want writers to do? Not to write outside their direct experience, not to imagine, not to inhabit other people, not to exercise their empathy and their imagination at all? Or what do you want here? Do you want every book that contains a member of a minority to have to go before a panel of that minority to be checked for authenticity? What do you want here? I recall an anecdote of my own experience when I submitted a story to a collection which had a character in it based directly on a guy that I'd met, a Jamaican street sweeper, a couple of times. You know, he spoke with a thick Jamaican patois. He met certain stereotypes, and I based this character entirely on him, only to get feedback from the editor that this was racist. Poor guy, a real guy who is apparently an avatar of racism. So yeah, the story was rejected. I just find it amusing that even real people can be rejected from fiction. Bizarre. What do you even want here? Why do you want to control what others say? You know, everyone benefits from this freedom. If we were to apply this evenly, then black writers couldn't write about white people. Women couldn't write about men. The romance genre would be dead except for same-sex relationships. You know, do you really want the only romance or erotic fiction to be slash fic? Don't answer that. I know some of you do. I mean, this whole thing is just stupid. Just give everybody the freedom to write whatever they want. The last piece of the puzzle here in this article, and more broadly, we've seen it all over the place, criticism of computer games and comics and everything else, is that they insist that what they're engaged in is criticism and not censorship. But that's just simply not true. The amount of pressure, the amount of opprobrium, the brigading on social media and mainstream media. I mean, all this stuff appears on the big blogs and in the big newspapers and everywhere else. The sheer amount of pressure and so on constitutes censorship. The pressure on publishers, the pressure on editors, the pressure on writers, socially, financially, reputationally, constitutes censorship. Someone steps out of line and they cannot possibly know until they do, a lot of the time, until they overstep the line. They don't know that they're doing anything wrong, and then they're already fucked. They're already subjected to this intense pressure, and it's causing people to self-censor in huge amounts. I think art is better when people are relatively unfettered to explore, to think, to imagine, to empathize. And I can't see much of anything, at least in the realm of fiction, that should be disallowed. You want to imagine some racist utopia where everyone other than whites has been wiped out? Knock yourself out. People will say it's shit. People will criticize it. That's fine. But banning it? I wouldn't be for that. You want to write about a cult of exploding sex midgets or something? What the fuck? Knock yourself out. People will say it's shit. So what? You know, there's this weird dichotomy in that someone like Chuck Tinkle can be a success, and yet people, you know, writing transgressive fiction in other ways can't. And what is transgressive these days? Pretty much anything, it seems like. PC culture is bad for art. Culture's the wrong word. Anti-culture. PC anti-culture is bad for art. It doesn't allow you to explore things, even in the minds of your villains, without being attacked. And that's not criticism. Criticism is, I don't like this because. Censorship is, this shouldn't exist because. This argument's just going to continue to go, and I hope, like in the 90s, the degree of PC-ness will just fade again. But this time round, there's the internet. So who knows? Back to governance stuff next time. Take care, guys. If you like what I do here, please like, subscribe. You can find me on social media, on Twitter at Grimachu, James Desborough on Facebook, James Grim Desborough on G+. My main website is postmortemstudios.wordpress.com. If you want to help me out with a little money, which will go to support my games, writing and other projects, you can do so at Patreon, which is also Grimachu.